Or not Alex,
And for reference, since I'm the timekeeper, I'll give y'all like a signal at like when y'all are 1 minute, like y'all asked. I'll just raise a 1.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Crane, and I'll be arguing for the affirmative. We affirm that the COVID-19 vaccines should be mandated at public college and universities. I'll start off by explaining the definitions of public universities and mandates. Definition 1, Oxford Languages defines public university or public college as a university or college that is in state ownership or receives significant public funds through a national or subnational government as opposed to a private university. Definition 2. Merriam-Webster defines mandates as an authoritative command, especially a formal order from a superior court or official to an inferior. The pro side affirms the resolution that by mandating vaccines at public universities will improve health and decrease spread of the virus. My first contention is that vaccine mandates are constitutional and safe. According to the National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, vaccines can mean the difference between life and death. Every year in the U.S., prior to COVID-19 pandemic, approximately 50,000 adults died from vaccine-preventable diseases. When you get sick, your children, friends, grandchildren, and parents may be at risk too. You don't get the vaccine just for yourself, you get it to protect your loved ones. Co-workers and strangers, as college students, we live very active lives. Most of us are working and going to school. Some of us are doing both and still attend clubs and extracurricular activities. A recent study by Behavioral Health Inc. states that 30% of students attend parties. At these parties, we aren't social distancing or wearing masks. The reason I bring this up is because we come into contact with a plethora of people, and as carriers of the virus, we may end up infecting people we do not know. Which is why public universities should mandate vaccines in order to control the spread. Yes, the government can legally mandate vaccines. The constitutional basis for vaccine mandates stems from the police powers of the states. Police powers are best defined as authority delegated to the states under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In Gibson versus Ogden, the Supreme Court described police power as an immense mass of legislation that includes health laws of every description. Again, health laws of every description. The U.S. federal government set up the Childhood Immunization Initiative aimed to increase vaccination rates amongst children against 7 diseases: diphtheria, measles, mumps, pertussis, polio, rubella, and tetanus. All states now require vaccination among children for public school enrollment. The U.S. government has been doing this since 1904, when the right of government to impose vaccines was established by the Supreme Court in Jacobson versus Massachusetts. In a 7-2 ruling, the court said even though a person may protest for personal reasons, in the interest of public health and safety, it could be mandated. In the end, Cambridge, Massachusetts could require all adults to be vaccinated against smallpox. While citizens in Cambridge, Massachusetts were dying from the smallpox epidemic between 1901 and 1903, public health officials began issuing compulsory vaccination orders in an effort to reach 90% vaccination rate for herd immunity. The state went as far as closing all schools, public libraries, and churches to stem the spread of the disease. Though it wasn't a forced vaccination, those who refused to get vaccinated faced a $5 fine, which is equivalent to $150 today. Public schools have required vaccinations for children for years. In 2009, the Texas legislature unanimously approved a bill to require all incoming first-time college students living on campus to be vaccinated against bacterial meningitis. Universities across the country have had a long history of requiring vaccinations, and there's legal precedent from over a century ago. Just because your personal beliefs may deter you from getting a vaccination, it is not illegal for a university to mandate vaccinations on the school if it is in the best interest of the school or the residents. I'm sorry, not the residents, or the students from the university. And that is. Thank you. Is that? Okay.
Just real quick, is he gonna jump in and cut us off when time happens?
I'll only cut you off if you're like 20 or 30 seconds over time.
Oh,
It's just so
okay.
you can finish like your last sentence or two.
Okay, cool. Just wanna make sure. Thank you. Sorry.
Can I just start whenever?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ari Lamastra, and I am negating the fact that all public colleges should mandate vaccines. The reason we are having this discussion in the first place is that these schools claim that they are caring for our health and the school's community. I believe this to be a false statement. In Texas's system alone, football has gained $200 million with a $27 million profit, as shown by the NCAA finance reports through USA Today, updated as early as October 26th. Not only is this a huge amount of money these schools are profiting from, since the 2020 season caused multiple cancellations or low attendance ratings, it's money that can go towards other programs and projects like research funding that the schools thrive on. College football generates more than $4 billion in annual revenue, as shown by the 65 universities making up the Power Five, according to data provided to Fortune by Patrick Rich, Director of Sports Business Programs at the Washington University in St. Louis. If these public colleges did in fact care about the health and well-being of the school's community, these big events would not be happening. Football games and even the homecoming we had just last week would be canceled in order to protect the community. The student body is sent hundreds of emails a week for each game that UNT plays in, from football to basketball, offering students free tickets just to attend. Why would a university prideful on its care for the community encourage people to continue going to these large events if it's just going to enforce a vaccine mandate? Another issue with mandating a vaccine in public college setting is its precedent. While vaccines have been mandated for lower education, the only vaccine required in college is meningitis if you live on campus. No other vaccination is required for students who transfer or who do not live on campus. The second point I'd like to make is trusting companies. In the past, many things have happened to the company known as Johnson & Johnson that have affected America to this date. Firstly, asbestos was found in their talc, used in their baby powder, and caused many children and adults to have cancer. A woman named Darlene Coker, whose story is told in an article published by Reuters Investigates. The article shares the entire timeline of Johnson & Johnson's legal battles with the talc and includes many of the documents that were released to the public. Johnson & Johnson claimed their powder was asbestos-free, but refused to release their data. Although her case was dropped in 1999, she was not the only one to come forward. Through a series of lawsuits and court orders, documents were released to the public showing Johnson & Johnson had known asbestos was in their powders as soon as 1959, 30 years prior to when her case was. In the last notion of this talc incident, Johnson & Johnson had to pay $2 billion in fees to over 20 women who had gotten ovarian cancer due to the talc. This is not the only issue Johnson & Johnson had in the past. By looking at Drug Watch, a company known to show legal battles through pharmaceutical companies, we can see that Johnson & Johnson has had 48,285 lawsuits filed against them. The most recent incident with Johnson & Johnson being the vaccine that they made for the COVID-19. The vaccine has shown signs of blood clotting in women and had to be completely taken off the market. However, Johnson & Johnson is not the only company that has produced a vaccine. With the new FDA approval on its back, Pfizer has been a popular company to get the vaccine from because society trusts our government officials. However, Pfizer is the only company out of the three big vaccine manufacturers that chose to gain profit from the vaccine. In a New York Times article titled, "Pfizer reaps hundreds of billions of dollars in profit from the COVID vaccine," Pfizer has been shown to have gotten $3.5 billion from the first 3 months of 2021 alone. This does not even include 2020 or the rest of 2021, which the company has produced billions more from. A company that thrives off the vaccine it is producing is going to push for more and more people to get mandated vaccinations, since it will receive more and more money. The last point I would like to make is exemptions. We already know through past mandates for vaccinations with other vaccines that exemptions, especially religious ones, skyrocket during times they are mandated. As vaccines become more and more to be a pressing matter, many people who are hesitant or may not want to get a vaccine will use the religious exemption to not get it. By leaving exemptions to public colleges, not only would there be a different process per school, it would allow a bias to be held. What's to say that people who are regulating exemptions only let people who claim Christian religious exemptions other than Muslim or any other religion? It leaves an unfair advantage to certain people and leaves fate in the hands of the university. How many people who actually need the exemption would be denied by bias or personal judgment? Thank you.
We are now in line for the first cross-examination.
Oh, we're jumping the gun.
Are we starting the crossfire now?
Whenever,
Okay, so you stated that in your speech here that if the schools truly cared or so about it, then why are we having football games? Or so it seems as if your argument is leading to a gathering or so in a sporting event or in a stadium and everything. If they truly cared about their students, they wouldn't be putting on these football games. As if profit or so is not also, if it are in the interest of the university, there are students who are who need, like in fast food, they provide students who don't have funds or anything, grants and things of that nature. Without profits that the school gets from that is actually something that's in their interest to get it for football, basketball games. These are something that will help the students if they're in need for it. You also brought up the blood clots, but according to Yale Med, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine only had 6 people who received the blood clot out of 6.8 billion. So it just seems like a pointless argument to bring up, considering there was only 6 reported cases of those blood clots. And you also referenced Johnson & Johnson's powder. I didn't see how that correlated with our current topic, considering it was a powder and we're referring to the vaccination mandate, so that we can continue normalcy, so that we can have this face-to-face interaction. So I didn't understand what you were, why you would reference the powder.
I can elaborate. With the powder, I brought up the powder to show the trust in the company, where if thousands upon thousands of people had been affected by Johnson & Johnson and had gotten cancer from it, why should these people be forced to get a vaccination from that company, even though they
But there are
previously
other,
had?
as you stated.
No, I completely understand. With the 6 people with the blood clotting, if it wasn't as big of an issue as you claim, why would they have taken it off of the market in the first place? It is no longer a vaccination that people can get. If it was only 6 people.
It's actually still a vaccination that people can get. It's still
It is not on the market to this date.
the Johnson &
Johnson & Johnson vaccine,
vaccination.
you cannot get the vaccination.
I'm pretty sure you're still able to get the vaccination for Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer.
Only Johnson, or
You also
Johnson.
stated
that's
that.
time.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dylan Kerrigan. I, along with my partner today, Alex, are arguing in the affirmative that all public colleges across the United States should be mandated to have a COVID-19 vaccine for the students and faculty. I'd like to build you all a brief roadmap real quick of what I'm about to talk about. To begin, I'd like to touch on some arguments that were brought up by our opponent a minute ago, some that were also brought up in the crossfire. And then from there on, I'd like to go ahead and hit on a few of the other arguments that my partner and I feel are very vital to our stance in this debate today. So let's begin with the football gaming profit argument. Our opponent brought up the fact that even though it's unsafe technically, by our standards at least, for people to congregate in small areas without the vaccine, And why are colleges profiting off of NCAA sports? That's a great point. However, our opponent is also failing to provide any evidence whatsoever about the number of those players that are actually vaccinated as we speak and are continuing to go on with all of their sports. So since they failed to do that, allow me to do it for you. I'd like to bring up a column by Matt Norlander, who works for the NCAA. He stated as early as September 28th of just this year, after a survey done across over 100 different Division I colleges in the United States of America, the majority of student athletes that are actively participating in college sports are vaccinated. Not just one, but both shots as well. The next point I'd like to bring up that our opponent talked about was the fact that they keep bringing up the Johnson & Johnson argument. Johnson & Johnson, as my partner stated a minute ago, Yale Med did a study and came out with the actual results that only 6 people out of the 6.8 million people that received the vaccination had the blood clots. Additional to that, all 6 of those people, according to yalemed.org, also had pre-existing conditions that normally caused blood clotting as well. So while they bring that point up, and it could be a very good point, however, they're not drawing a very direct line from the blood clotting from pre-existing conditions to that being caused by the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Additional to that, that's not the point that we're arguing today. So it's really a topicality drop on their part. What we're arguing today is for the FDA-approved vaccinations to be mandated across college campuses for not only the students, but the faculty involved. Another point that our opponent brought up was that of the profits that are made from Pfizer. That could be a very good point, another ethical point that they're attempting to make as well. However, in doing so, my opponents are failing to mention that other companies that have created vaccinations throughout our nation's history, what are the profits that they gain? Any medical company that goes out and puts their neck on the line and requires their scientists to develop vaccinations for deadly diseases and viruses, they're going to gain profit. That's just simple economics. And our opponents are failing to bring that up. On the religious exemption part that my opponent brought up as well, they're drawing a line about how people are going to try to claim and use a loophole of religious exemptions to get away from the vaccine, and I'm assuming that means therefore it's pointless. However, my opponents are failing to remember the case that the Supreme Court ruled on of the case of Love versus Reed. In that case, the Supreme Court laid out a very strong and very clear and concise precedent that in order to claim any type of religious exemption from anything, you don't have to necessarily prove that your religion exists, but you have to prove that your religious beliefs are sincerely held. And in doing so, then you might have the possibility to claim religious exemptions. However, in bringing up that point, my opponents are also failing to provide any type of statistical data whatsoever that would show the potential of how many students could be doing that, or faculty across public college campuses in the United States of America. Finally, I'd like to go into our second contention. A lot of things that you'll probably see brought up on this issue, not just today, but out in your normal lives as well, are the myths related to the COVID-19 vaccine. There's a lot of myths that come out about how the vaccines will make you electromagnetic. That's not the case. They also don't contain any microchips. Vaccines are developed to fight against diseases and are not administered to track your movement, is another myth as well. Vaccines work by stimulating your immune system in order to produce antibodies, exactly like if you were to be exposed to the disease. Additional to that, after getting vaccinated, according to the CDC, you do develop immunity to the disease without having to get the disease first, which would lead into another point that many people bring up about natural immunity. However, obviously, look amongst us on our own college campus, we have many people that fall within the age categories of anywhere from 18 to above 60, including faculty. The vaccine is going to be the most safe, the most precise, and the absolute best way to combat the spread of COVID-19 on college campuses. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lex Burns. Me and along with my team, we're here to argue the negative that COVID-19 mandates should not be instituted in public colleges. Now, I want to start off with pointing out something that my opponent said about player vaccination rates. I found it very interesting that in order to justify the vaccination of whole stadiums, we use statistics that apply to 48 players on each sidelines, when there's stadiums in Texas with capacities that easily fill over 60,000 that are operating at full capacity since the beginning of the start of this football season this fall. And since we are want to hear statistics, I do have some statistics for you. According to the Center for Disease Control website of the United States government, since September 14th, 2021, COVID rates have been in steady decline in Texas, and in average new COVID case numbers per day, they've been in steady decline. And this is without public mandates, with sports at full capacity, with basketball just starting up at full capacity, and their COVID rates has still dropped. And we're here to argue a mandate that would impede these profits that come in and flow into these universities for a problem that's already being handled naturally through things like mask regulations, social distancing that are being encouraged around the state that are finally beginning to work. Also, people electively deciding to get vaccinated has also led to the drop in case numbers. The next thing you talked about was you questioned the point of my teammates Johnson & Johnson correlation. And let me elaborate on that. That was to discuss the mistrust in these major corporations that have so much control and power over our lives in these certain times. Johnson & Johnson has countless scandals that you can go through. The powder one is just one. But connecting to this vaccine, her point is, we're mandating something that there's going to be problems electively with things that are massively mandated and that have been pushed out rapidly. According to the United States Center for Disease Control website, the COVID-19 vaccine does represent a risk of heart inflammation such as myocarditis and pericarditis. And it quotes the website saying, the benefits of COVID-19 vaccination outweigh the known and possible risks. We're here at an academic facility to argue that we're going to mandate something that there's known and possible risk to, that's already being nullified by the wearing of masks and social distancing. If these numbers were increasing, maybe a mandate would be a great idea, or an option that would reflect the needs for the society and broader society. But here, this seems to be just exclusionary. It aims to exclude different people with different types of issues. You noted the football profits, and that it's just a simple notion of economics. And to that point, that is true. It's simple economics. But if we hamper these economics, but with mandates, and we start not letting people in that are not mandated, that are not involved with the community, that are not involved with the university directly, whose money furthers the economic prosperity of the university and supports the programs, we're not doing the university any favors, and it's not helping with the spread of the COVID in saving lives, because those numbers are already going down. We need to make smart decisions. We talk about religious exemptions. According to thehill.com, one of the largest independent news sources in the United States, United Airlines laid off over 600 employees recently who refused to get the vaccine. Out of all those 600 employees, none of their religious exemptions were respected. None of their constitutional rights to a exemption were respected. They lost their jobs, and these are the types of effects that we're going to see inside of our institutions. And we're not here to argue ridiculous myths. We're here to speak on facts here. Thank you.
Are we going across there? Oh, we stand there.
We, I don't, they just sit down, so whatever you.
Are you cool with that, Judge? We sit down for the crossfires, is that fine? Ready, boss?
I'm ready, boss man.
All right. I'd like to ask you 2 quick questions, and then I'll give you the rest of the time to go ahead and ask your questions, if that's fair with you.
Absolutely.
You stated a source that noted that the spread of COVID-19 had begun to decline in September of this year. That's correct, right?
That's correct, September 14th.
Are you also aware that the FDA approved the vaccine for the COVID-19 as early as August of this year? So do you think that it's possible that the decline in the spread of COVID is due to the fact that the vaccine had been approved by the FDA and has now been administered to different businesses, school campuses, and in our society as a whole?
I absolutely think that is a big reason that it
That's great,
has
that helps our
declined.
case. Moving on to my second point.
But
I'd
that
like
does
to
not
talk
answer
about the
why
fact-
the vaccine cases, there haven't been mandates since early August.
Right, but
anyway.
if it's already on the decline after the creation of the vaccine.
Then what's the
and
need of a
approval,
mandate if it's already on decline, if people can
Because you're not
independently get
providing
the
a
vaccine?
source that says during that month gap, that the decline in the cases is not due to the vaccine. So now
It's
that there's a
irrelevant, the
decline-
source of the drop. The drop is indicative of the cases shrinking, and that means that
Right,
things
and
are
the
becoming
cases shrinking
safer.
is an indicative to the fact that the COVID-19 vaccine has been approved by the FDA and it has been administered. But I'd like to move on to my second point, and I'm going to give you the rest of the time. When you were talking about NCAA athletes, and you were talking about this, we're not having any way to mention the spread, that I didn't want in my speech, had no way to mention the spread about people that are in the stands. That's correct, right? I wasn't bringing up a point like that. My point was about the athletes themselves, and that's the source provided by the science that I brought up to you by Matt Norlander. And then also, are you aware that the CDC, whenever you mentioned masks a minute ago, the CDC quotes that the vaccine is 95% effective to combating stopping the spread of the COVID-19, as opposed to a mask, which is only 74%. Would you agree that 95 is a better chance than 74?
We're not here to oppose the vaccine. We're here
I thought
to
that was your
oppose the mandate.
contention when you opened with your opening argument. That's what your partner said. that
We're
you
here to
were
oppose
opposing the
vaccine
spread.
mandates in public college. That's what we're here to discuss.
Right, and you haven't provided a shred of evidence that states on college campuses that the vaccine being mandated would not stop the spread.
We're not talking about that. What we're saying
You're not
is,
talking about the
we're
spread.
saying that the spread is being
19
mitigated without a mandate, so instituting a mandate would cause more
Is it being
problems.
mitigated on college campuses or in society as a whole? Because that's the point that you just brought up.
In society as a whole.
But we're
and
talking about college campuses, and
and-
you remember those are your words a second ago, correct?
If the point of college students, the players, in being vaccinated, 48 players on each sideline, completely ignores the fact that there's
I don't understand
tens of
the
thousands of people there's tens of thousands of people in the stands
Right,
that can spread the virus, and that there's no
Do you agree
mandate, that are
people that
unmasked,
go to games are
unvaccinated,
not
and the
necessarily
vaccine
students
and
or
the
faculty?
COVID rates are still rising. If the COVID rates,
You
the
just
COVID
said
rates
the
are still
COVID rates are
dropping.
declining.
That's
My
fine.
fault.
I don't
The
think you
COVID rates are still
understand
dropping.
the argument.
Okay.
Brief question. After we speak on this round, we can't take any prep time?
You continue, you guys gotta ask for it.
No, prep time goes away before
I
the rebuttal.
don't think that there's any prep time allotted.
There is, there's 2 minutes in total for each side.
He said we could have 2 minutes.
Yeah, he said
to
2
vote.
minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
I just want to know after this round if there's,
It's after your defense account.
Yeah, so you can take it right now. That's the question.
You want
Yeah, we'd like prep time, please.
2 minutes?
Sure. Are you, 30 seconds left.
Time's up?
No, 30 seconds left.
Okay.
Did you want to end prep time?
Cease prep time.
Okay. Y'all have 12 seconds left.
Perfect.
What's it?
Okay, so I'd like to touch on a few things that our opponents have mentioned. I believe previously the gentleman spoke on the mistrust in companies, which is why people do not trust the vaccines, because kind of leading to they do not know what is in the vaccine, since the Johnson & Johnson company has had a history of people getting blood clots and the powder that they referenced. The young lady also referenced how the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is currently not being administered or so, or available at this time. So I kind of first like to start on those points. So people say that they don't trust the vaccine because they don't know what's in it, as if, you know, it's ever stopped anyone from eating fast food or drinking sodas. But I digress. The ingredients in the COVID-19 include lipids, acids, its acid stabilizers, salt, and sugar, which all work together to maintain the stability of the vaccine after it's produced. Besides the mRNA vaccine, every other ingredient you can find in the foods that are so that you eat. And according to goodhealth.com or so, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is actually still being distributed under EUA in the United States. All current vaccines are effective at preventing severe illnesses and hospitalizations currently at this time. And according to the Center for Disease and Control, people between the ages of 18 and 24, over 66% of this age range is vaccinated at this time. They reference that there is a decrease in the virus due to the vaccine, kind of adding to our point. Even without the mandates on the school, there has been shown proof that there are less hospitalizations and a decrease in it. So why would you not mandate a vaccine if it has been proven to be working? There still haven't made sense or so on that end of why they brought up that point. Initially, in the first speaker's argument, she brought up the religious exemption, and I would like to touch on that as well. When it comes to religious exemption, you must make sure that those beliefs are sincerely held. If you consult religious scholars from across all faiths, you will find that clergy and scholars alike are saying pretty consistently there is nothing substantially in there, or there is nothing of substance in their religion that would prevent their adherents from getting the vaccine. So I like to ask our opponents exactly, when you bring up religious exemption, exactly what religion are you referring to, and what is their text stating that provides, you know, in their beliefs that you cannot get vaccinated. Some Orthodox Jewish rabbis made a PSA encouraging Americans to get the COVID-19 vaccine. The Pope also made a video telling Catholics that getting the vaccine would be an act of love. And under the Archdiocese of Chicago instructed their priests not to grant religious exemption to their congregation because they go against church teaching. And while some Catholic and evangelical leaders raised objection to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of how it was developed, they did not oppose the vaccination overall. So I'd still like to just ask that question to our opponents. Exactly how does a religious exemption help and support your case if these religious scholars and leaders of these communities have all been stated and put on the record that it does not go against their teachings or their beliefs? And she referenced that, it ignores other religious groups because, for the primary focus, we're looking at Christianity, and she referenced that there are Muslim communities and she actually didn't state any other religious groups that I know of. So I would just like them to elaborate exactly what religious groups that they are speaking of that prevents people from getting the vaccine. And I also like to state that the COVID vaccines do not create or cause extra variants or of the virus. They can actually help you prevent variants from emerging. New variants of the vaccine happen because the virus that causes COVID-19 is consistently changing through a natural ongoing process of mutation. Even before the COVID vaccine, there are several variants of the disease. High vaccination coverage in population reduces the spread of the virus and helps prevent new variants from emerging. The Center for Disease and Control recommends that everyone 12 years of age and older get the vaccination as soon as possible. And again, our opponents continue to reference the economic aspect of how Pfizer and Moderna may be getting. I guess that's my time.
My name is Courtney Brown. I will be summarizing the negative. One of the major points I want to bring up that my opponents brought up was the topic of religion when it comes to exemptions. I would also like to make sure it's clear that we understand that there are more than 2 religions in the United States of America. I would also like to point out that when we are talking about mandates, that our opponents primarily only referenced Christianity and Christian-based religions. There are many religions that do not partake in vaccines as part of their beliefs. Islam and many Islamic-based religions are part of those. And in trying to center the idea around the lack of necessity for religious exemption around Christianity, it doesn't quite encapsulate the totality of America. If we are also going to expand on that when it comes to religion, one thing that our opponents brought up was that in order to gain exemption, religious beliefs must be shown as sincerely held. Who is to determine that? Who determines sincerely held beliefs? Is it authority figures? Because if it comes to Christianity, how many different types of pastors, sects, how many different branches in which these authority figures are separated can we go to? I'd also like to point out that Dylan, in talking about the football statistics, did not repudiate Ari's point about schools encouraging students to come to these football games and large gatherings in general. UNT sent out an email consistently, even today, asking people to come to these large events. So once again, it is clear that these schools are not necessarily enforcing a mandate because they want to better the community. It's more so as a way to continue profit. Also, as my team mentioned before, these same companies that have been pushing for this vaccine have both raked in profits, Pfizer for sure, and also consistently show a lack of reason for us as a public to trust them. Johnson & Johnson, as mentioned, during their case with Darlene Coker, it was made clear that it was known for over a decade that their talcum powder caused cancer. So if they were already aware of this and did not, and fought her on this case, why are we to assume that this is a company that we can trust in? And again, this is a big business that we have, that we're watching take place right in front of us. This mistrust is something that should not be mandated onto somebody. We also had brought up the point that that COVID-19 rates since September have been going down. But again, that's without a mandate. And though it is very clear the effectiveness of the vaccine, that mandate is the difference between the voluntary action and willingness to take it personally versus having your bodily freedom infringed upon. So it's not necessarily about the effectiveness of the vaccine. We have the science to see that. It's about the need to force the use of it onto people, especially in spaces like college campuses, where there is a diverse amount of people, very large amounts of religious range, in which we need to make sure that we are not centering certain groups over others. Again, Christianity is not the only religion in this country. And I would also like to say that I would really like to wrap it up by saying that what we stand here to oppose is not the vaccine itself. We have the evidence to see that the vaccine is effective. What we are here to oppose is a mandate. When it comes to the numbers, we have seen that without a mandate, decline has taken place. So if decline has taken place without a mandate, companies have made a lot of money and will make more money with a mandate. And schools, regardless, are still encouraging people to come, whether or not there is a mandate in place. Then what functional purpose does enforcing a mandate actually provide to the students?
At this time, Mr. Brown, crossfire.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look this up and
Okay.
Wait, sorry,
So I'd like to ask you guys, you continuously reference the decrease in COVID cases or so. I'd like to ask, is that from just the data in Texas, or is that at the United States as a whole?
The data I have is from the daily tracker of cases within Texas.
Is that a website?
Specifically. The COVID Center for Disease Control website for the United States. Also, New York Times also has a daily
Because New York
tracker.
Times is never biased. That's a very
It's an
reliable
independent
source.
newspaper, and this, I would say the CDC.
Did you get it from the op-ed section?
I think the CDC.
You also
I think the
stated
CDC is pretty well.
that,
But I do have a question for you guys. We were mentioning how the 48 players on each sideline being vaccinated.
We mentioned 48 players?
The players on each sidelines, which is amounts to 48 players on each roster, of each
sport?
sideline
Are
of
you talking
football,
about tennis or
for
golf?
football. These players, they're vaccinated at a high rate, absolutely, and even they're not mandated, they're highly encouraged to, but they are vaccinated at a higher rate.
Is there a
But
question?
what do we have to say for all the players, the thousands of people that come, the alumni, the students, the faculty that are all encouraged to come to the games, that are heavily involved in student life on campus, heavily involved in classes, close
That's a great
encounter
point. So people
exchanges,
are encouraged
and
to
they're
go,
not
you're saying they will go.
mandated to have
So
vaccines.
people are encouraged to go, you're
But
saying they will go,
yet
correct?
cases still
Yes or
tend
no?
to drop in Texas. Why are we instituting a mandate if cases are
So if
dropping?
people are encouraged to go,
currently.
you're saying they will go, and that creates a health hazard, yes? So by your logic, if
No,
people
I'm
are
saying people are
encouraged
going
or
and then
mandated
there's
to
not
get
a health
vaccine,
hazard. So
then
why
they
are we
will get
instituting a
vaccine.
mandate?
I'm
I'm
using
saying
your
people are
own
attending and
logic
there's,
to use
where
our
I'm
point.
using my logic to say that there's,
You've already said
people
your
are
statement
attending,
3
people are
times.
attending the games and they're not getting sick. So why are we instituting a mandate?
Do you have any
Proof
evidence
that
on
they're
that?
not getting
Yes,
They're not getting sick?
the Texas,
Based upon how many people attend college football games, you know how many people do and do not get sick. That's what you're saying, yes or
the
no?
public health crisis we're going through is becoming better, is
That's
the
great. That's
cases are
fantastic. Based
diminishing
on what you're saying,
without
how many
mandates.
people
And
go
we're
to
here to
college
argue,
events
so how
and do
is
or do
a
not get sick?
mandate gonna help? So you're arguing that a mandate will increase the
Yes,
rate
because
of
as we
this.
have argued, and as you have argued for us,
At
the
the cost
vaccine
of our,
works.
at the cost of individual freedoms and values.
It's not a cost of individual freedoms, as we've mentioned before.
Clearly it is.
Because the Supreme Court has set precedent in the past.
According to,
That's an
well,
argument
the
that you
Supreme
guys
Court,
failed to
the
drop
Supreme Court
as well.
ruling didn't do anything for those 600 employees of airlines, for all the nurses that have been.
Because those are state mandated regulations, and that's what we're arguing, is that the states should mandate vaccines.
Those were company instituted regulations.
Actually, it's an
Right, and those
executive
companies are
order
based in
by the-
states, and the way that the United States government works is you have states that have their own local governments, and you have the federal
So the
government as
precedent
well.
set by them,
So
you think
if
the
the
colleges
states
are
mandate
immune. The
that
colleges
there's vaccines that are
colleges are
required
completely
for
immune to
colleges.
precedent set in every other sector.
No, what do you, no, that doesn't make any sense.
What,
The state
what do-
government
what-
has to
what do
mandate that
colleges-
it.
What do
it
public
is
colleges
accepted.
promote?
All right, so in our closing argument today, I would like to go ahead and touch on a few things that have been brought up here recently in the summary speeches by both my opponent and my partner as well. I'd like to clarify a lot of things. It seems like some things are being confused by our opponents, especially. So I'd like to clarify a few of those things. The last speaker that came up spoke about how my partner came up and talked about the only religion that he provided facts and statistical evidence for saying that there shouldn't be a problem with the vaccine was Christianity. Apparently they weren't listening because my partner also brought up Jewish rabbis that made these statements as well. I'm not a religion expert, but I think we all know there's a big difference between Jews and Christians. Moving on from that, when we're talking about what is a sincerely held belief, our opponent questioned that authority a minute ago, I'm assuming in reference to my case of Love v. Reed that I brought up in my first speech today. And he asked, and I quote, "Who decides what are these sincerely held beliefs?" Well, the reason I brought up the case is because the case brief, if you read it online, tells you who does it. And that is the courts themselves. So the government does have the right, as we've seen in cases like Love v. Reed, and that's just one small example. The government does have the right to determine whether or not your religious beliefs are sincerely held. And that is done through a process that was created through what they call the Reed model. So in order for somebody to claim that they have religious exemption, they will have to follow the guidelines from the Reed model in order to prove that their religious beliefs are sincerely held, which I guess in turn could prevent them from getting the vaccine. Now, as I stated earlier, I'd like to reiterate in regards to religion, our opponents have brought no statistical evidence whatsoever in regards to how many students or faculty could possibly try to get a religious exemption. It seems like one of the biggest topics about the debate today. However, our opponents have provided no statistical evidence. All they've said is that people could do it. Well, a lot of things could happen. Whenever our opponent brought up a minute ago about how the football games, and I'm assuming they're just using football as a reference, but I think it's safe to say we can say all sporting events across college campuses, people are being encouraged to go to those games and attend it and support their teams. Obviously, that's how we create support pride. So their point is that in order that people are being encouraged to go, that it could create a health hazard because people are not vaccinated. But they stand here today and they state that there is no need to mandate vaccines. So by their own logic, if we were to encourage, aka mandate, vaccines for college campuses across the U.S., people would have no problem doing it. If people have no problem taking that risk assessment and going to the games without the vaccine, why would they not have a problem going and getting the vaccine as well? Another point that I'd like to bring up is that in the opening argument, my partner brought up the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine. That's just been an argument that's been dropped by our opponents today. They haven't spoken on the effectiveness whatsoever of the vaccine, in particular the Moderna and Pfizer one that have been approved by the FDA that we have been arguing about, not the Johnson & Johnson. So by our opponents not mentioning the effectiveness of it, we have no choice but to assume that they are conceding that argument to that of the affirmative today. Moving on from that, our opponents have stated that without a mandate, that the cases of COVID-19 had declined. The data that they actually did provide in this debate pertains to that question as well, that question alone. And that came from the month of September. As I stated earlier, COVID-19 was FDA approved, the COVID-19 vaccine was FDA approved in August of this year. They've done they have no statistical evidence whatsoever that would disenfranchise the fact of drawing a line that directly correlates the decline in COVID-19 spreading and the creation or approval of the FDA approval of the vaccine as well. So you have to assume that that is directly in correlation. So just to wrap up, I've mentioned, first of all, your religious exemptions, and I've explained it in clear. I've mentioned the fact that our opponents have dropped the effectiveness argument that we brought up in our opening argument. And I've spoken on the difference between the mandating and the declining of the vaccine and how the decline of the COVID-19 spreading has been due to the fact of the vaccine being created. So with all that said and done, I just don't see any point other than that for the stance of the affirmative in today's debate. Thank you.
start off with thanking you guys for your time today to come out, and I just want to close out and round out our argument that vaccine mandates should not be instituted in public colleges. I want to start off with clarifying that we did not go forth and mention a lot about the effectiveness of the vaccine because that's not what we're here to argue today. We're here to argue the need for a mandate and the reasons that mandates should or should not be instituted. Here today, we think that mandates should not be instituted. And to touch on points that we have already stated, there is a stated known and possible risk to this vaccine. And we're going to claim that we're going to institute a mandate for a campus of over 40,000 students, many of which are in close interactions, public transportation, all these things. To institute a mandate on such a large amount of people that has known and possible risks listed by the government, it just seems to be against the free thinking point, the flow of ideas that an institution like a college is meant to promote. To assert the religious exemptions, there is no reason that we have to believe that people's religious exemptions are going to be respected, basically pure off the fact that not everyone's Jewish, not everyone's a Christian, not everyone's Muslims. One of the paramount things to American values is that you can create your own religion. Your religion may be that you're afraid of needles and you don't penetrate your body with any foreign substances. And that has to be taken into consideration. Among those 600 airlines employees that were terminated, their grievances, their religion, their effectiveness, their usefulness, their cost, none of this was taken into consideration. That Supreme Court ruling, the Reed argument, that didn't protect them. And that precedent will carry on into our institutions if we don't set boundaries and guidelines to protect these values. For sports profits and the football games, we're not here to argue semantics of what's a football game and what's not a football game. And well, we're here to talk about the fact is there's been no mandates, no limits to students and faculty coming in and organizing in tight spaces with no vaccines, with nothing. There's been no mandates instituted in Texas for this. Yet, the total number of cases in Texas do drop. And my statistic wasn't from September. Let me speak a little slower. The statistic represents a trend that started in September and continues to till today. So, this, from all of the points that we've collected today, we're here to argue that the mandate is not essential. It's not, the benefits of a mandate do not overweigh the benefits of the not mandating. We do not need to mandate the vaccine in public colleges because that goes against the values that colleges are trying to promote. The diversity, the free thinking, and we're going to institute a policy that is very discriminatory in nature and just doesn't have anything to offer to people that have alternative viewpoints and standpoints with the research and other things that are going in, to what happens. You spoke on that there's already mandates, there's already been mandates in place back in the flu pandemic. Nowadays, it's not as big of a population that is currently being affected by the COVID vaccine. In the United States, the COVID cases now, specifically in Texas, are going down. So instituting a mandate within Texas, within public colleges, simply goes against everything that colleges stand for, as in diversity and other things. We thank you guys for your time today, and thank you.
guys. That was really, really fun to watch.